Good morning and happy rainy Sunday. We'll start with our gathering song, There is More Love Somewhere. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Gelati, and my wife Karen and I have been coming to UU services since mid-1995. I'm the chairperson of the Adult Education Ministry and on the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the online services of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. We're so glad that each of you are able to join us this morning, and together in community, we can ensure that social distancing does not mean social disengagement. Our weekly services are more than just a gathering of our physical bodies. It is the forming of a sacred time that we make together. Whether you're well-versed in the technology of teleconferencing, or this is your first venue, we welcome you. For those of you who are new among us, connecting with fond hearts, we invite you to introduce yourself and where you're connecting from in the chat box as you are comfortable. Whatever the faith and tradition of your past, whatever your theological stance, whatever your heritage, whoever you are, whomever you love, we welcome you. You can learn more about us on our website and Facebook page. We encourage you to share our Facebook page and reach out to others who may be isolated at this time and might benefit from the spiritual connection with our loving community. And for the announcements this morning, please stay with us for a brief veterans recognition led by Joe Gelati following the postlude this morning. For our June 6th Flower Communion and Bridges service this year, we'd like to invite each of you to Bring on the flowers. Send a photo of you with a flower communion selfie to Sherry Kiriakou via email or text by Tuesday, June 1st. The annual meeting of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury will take place on June 6th, 2021, following the 10 a.m. service via Zoom. After our service, we invite you to stay and participate in the breakout group for individual connection and deeper check-ins. Again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury, where we welcome all in the spirit of compassion, inquiry, and service. Today, we welcome Reverend Julie Taylor as our guest minister. Reverend Julie is a Unitarian Universalist community minister specializing in critical incident response, community crisis, and spiritual care. Reverend Julie is the senior director of the contextual ministry at Medville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. Additionally, Reverend Julie serves as a trauma response minister and a UU military minister at Great Lakes. Reverend Taylor, welcome. We're glad to have you with us this morning.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here with all of you this morning. And yeah, I'm on the board of the UU Trauma Response Ministry and on the board of the UU, the military ministry at Great Lakes. I serve the 109th Airlift Wing in Scotia, New York, which is up near Schenectady and Albany, as a chaplain with the 109th Airlift Wing. Thank you for that welcome. So our opening words today come from another UU military chaplain, Chaplain Major George Tiger, who's an active duty Army chaplain. And he wrote this actually for this particular weekend. This is called The Gift of Remembrance. I met Scott's father a year after he was killed. It was a pilgrimage for me. I drove 1,000 miles, every moment wondering if he'd see me as a symbol of the system that had taken his son. When he and his wife met me in their front yard, Mike and I hugged tightly for too short an eternity. Not a day goes by when something doesn't bring to mind a young life now gone. Ghosts of what might have been are my everyday companions. I will not let them go for fear if I do, I will forget. I'm greeted when least expected with waves of unbidden grief. A tightness in the throat, vision blurred by welling tears, a little tremor in my hand. All things that remind me that I will not forget. How many children lost? How many parents grieve? These memories, these ghosts are necessary reminders of the futility of war and the desperate need for peace in our world. The memories which come upon me not as thoughts, but as bodily sensations have deepened my compassion and steeled commitment to bring peace to the suffering world. I serve in the US Army. I support the readiness of those who have and will fight and win the wars our civilian leaders call us to fight. I love the people I'm called to serve, knowing full well the dreadful reality we will all one day face again. How then can I speak of peace? This is the difficulty of a holiday like Memorial Day. Memorial Day is not to be celebrated, it is to be observed, scrutinized and witnessed on behalf of the true witnesses of our human failure to love our neighbor as ourselves. They are ghosts now, haunting lives with the gift of remembrance, so that we will not forget their living, but even more, that the grief of remembering will create in us a yearning for peace that will stir us to action. Please join us now in the chalice lighting.
Please join me in the words in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another, and celebrate life. And now, children, if you are in the room and not near the screen, please come closer and help us with the children's affirmation. If you're not a child, you can do it anyway. We were all children once. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. And now please stay close to the screen for Reverend Julie Taylor's Time for All Ages.
So this morning I've brought a book, and I'm sorry that I don't have you won't all be able to see the pictures with it this time, but it's called Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge. That's the title of the book, and it's written by Mem Fox, illustrated by Julie Vivas. So I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it here. There was once a small boy called Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge, and what's more, he wasn't very old either. His house was next door to an old people's home, and he knew all the people who lived there. He liked Mrs. Jordan, who played the organ. He listened to Mr. Hosking, who told him scary stories. He played with Mr. Trippett, who was crazy about cricket. That's the game, not the animal. He ran errands for Miss Mitchell, who walked with a wooden stick. He admired Mr. Drysdale, who had a voice like a giant. But his favorite person of all was Miss Nancy Allison Delacourt Cooper, because she had 4 names, just as he did. He called her Miss Nancy and told her all his secrets. One day, Wilfred Gordon heard his mother and father talking about Miss Nancy. Poor old thing, said his mother. Why is she a poor old thing? Asked Wilfred Gordon. Because she's lost her memory, said his father. It isn't surprising, said his mother. After all, she is 96. What's a memory? Asked Wilfred Gordon. He was always asking questions. It's something you remember, said his father. But Wilfred Gordon wanted to know more, so he called on Mrs. Jordan, who played the organ. What's a memory? He asked. Something warm, child. Something warm. He called on Mr. Hosking, who told him scary stories. What's a memory? He asked. Something from long ago, lad. Something from long ago. He called on Mr. Trippett, who was crazy about cricket. What's a memory? He asked. Something that makes you cry, my boy. Something that makes you cry. He called on Miss Mitchell, who walked with a wooden stick. What's a memory? He asked. Something that makes you laugh, my darling. Something that makes you laugh. Then he called on Mr. Drysdale, who had a voice like a giant. What's a memory? He asked. Something precious as gold, young man. Something as precious as gold. So Wilfred Gordon went home again to look for memories for Mrs. Nancy because she had lost her own. He looked for the shoebox of shells he had found long ago last summer and put them gently in a basket. He found a puppet on strings, which always made everyone laugh, and he put that in the basket too. He remembered with sadness the medal which his grandfather had given him, and he placed it gently next to the shells. Next, he found his football, which was as precious as gold. And last of all, on his way to Miss Nancy's, he went into the hen house and took a fresh, warm egg from under a hen. Then Wilfred Gordon called on Miss Nancy and gave her each thing one by one. What a dear, strange child to bring me all these wonderful things, thought Miss Nancy. Then she started to remember. She held the warm egg and told Wilfred Gordon about the tiny speckled blue eggs she had once found in a bird's nest in her aunt's garden. She put a shell to her ear and remembered going to the beach by tram long ago, and how hot she had felt in her button-up boots. She touched the medal and talked sadly of the big brother she had loved, who had gone to war and never returned. She smiled at the puppet on strings and remembered the one she had shown her sister, and how she had laughed with a mouthful of porridge. She bounced the football to Wilfred Gordon and remembered the day she had met him and all the secrets they told. And the two of them smiled and smiled because Miss Nancy's memory had been found again by a small boy who wasn't very old either. The end.
And now it's time for our shared milestones this morning. So feel free to share what's lifting you up or weighing on your heart on this Memorial Day weekend. You can share in the chat, or if you have at home a stone and a bowl, or you can light a candle in remembrance today.
It is now time for our congregational offering. If you are with us for the first time, feel free to pass the virtual plate, for your presence here in the Zoom room is your gift to us. Members, please click the link on your screen to make a donation or pledge. Even though we're not in our beloved fellowship hall, our operating expenses are still the same. You may also mail a check to UUCD at 24 Clapboard Ridge Road in Danbury. And thank you for doing your part to support and sustain this community that we love. Please join me in our congregational response. In the spirit of compassion and service, we dedicate these our offerings.
So it was a little over 5 years ago. It was Easter Sunday, 2016. My family and I, we went to church and went home. I finished packing my car and drove to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, to be on 5 weeks for commissioned officer training with the Air Force. Then later that fall, once again, I jumped into the aging Hyundai and drove to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for 6 weeks of the Air Force Chaplain Corps College. Well, I can't say I loved every minute of my trainings. I wouldn't trade them for anything. Those weeks were transformative for me. They were also sacrifice for me and for my family. In truth, my military service in general is a sacrifice my family makes. I'm a chaplain with the New York Air National Guard. Every month I travel to upstate New York for long drill weekends. Over the course of the year, I'm also gone a week or two for additional training and service, and then there are deployments. I haven't been deployed overseas yet, but I have participated in what we call local, state missions. And yet those international deployments are coming. It's possible next year even I'll be deployed to the other side of the globe for a number of months. It's the reality of military service, even for those of us in the Air and Army National Guard. Gone are the days when Guard service meant staying stateside. Right now, about 80 members of my wing are deployed long ways away in places that are a lot harder than it is wherever we are right now. Members sacrifice time with family, with friends, time for school, and in the Guard, we sacrifice time at our civilian careers. Too many of us sacrifice our very lives. But that part of that sacrifice is one we acknowledge and accept as part of our call to this service. It's even named in the Airman's Creed that we memorize. Part of it reads, "I defend my country with my life." Now, even as a chaplain, as a non-combatant who's not permitted to even pick up a weapon under any circumstances, I still defend my country with my life. So Memorial Day was a special day when I was a kid. We dressed in red, white, and blue. We had a big lunch at my grandparents' house, and we went to the cemetery every year. We put flowers on the graves of our relatives, but we also decorated the graves of service members. We brought flowers and flags to decorate the graves, and we would remember. My grandparents were just leaving high school when the US entered World War II. My grandfather enlisted in the Navy and served throughout the war, although he was never deployed overseas. Many of their high school friends served, and many of them died. My dad's middle name, he was named actually after their best friend from high school who was killed in the Pacific Theater. My great-grandmother was a Gold Star mother during World War II. One of her sons, who was a pilot, was shot down and missing in action, assumed dead. He actually came home after the war, to the surprise of everyone. He had been captured, but not listed as a POW, so he was assumed MIA, or KIA. Another great uncle was stationed in Pearl Harbor, and he was another Navy man, but happened to be in town rather than on his ship in the morning of December 7th. There were always stories that he told, and the rest of that generation of the family told, about the Christmas presents he had bought and he was planning to send home that were probably still in his footlocker at the bottom of the Pacific. Two of my uncles served in the Navy, one during Vietnam. He died many years ago. He never talked about his service. My dad was 4F during Vietnam and so was not drafted. I come from a Navy family, even though I'm serving in the Air Force, first one as far as I know. But military service, even though that family connection, it was a while ago, and it was held at a distance. I grew up in the 80s. I didn't have friends going off to war at that time from my high school class. I was just old enough at the end of the Vietnam War to know it was happening, but mostly what I knew of Vietnam was what I watched in movies. In 1991, I went to Washington, D.C. and protested against the first Gulf War. And then as a New Yorker, right after 9/11, I was part of, and there were many demonstrations and groups who used the heading "Not in Our Name," meaning don't go to war in the name of New York City because of what happened here. I was a New Yorker. the time. I supported these demonstrations in groups. And now I wear a uniform. It's complicated. So Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day. The first recorded Decoration Day took place on May 1st, 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina. Now this reading, I'm going to actually read from this plaque that I presume y'all can see here in this photograph. This plaque, and this has been placed near the reflecting pool here that you can see in what's now Hampton Park. It's the former site of the Union Cemetery at Washington Racecourse in Charleston, South Carolina. The plaque reads, "First Memorial Day in the United States of America, May 1st, 1865. At the time of the Civil War, Hampton Park was the site of the Washington Racecourse, which was owned by the South Carolina Jockey Club and was one of the most famous racetracks of the antebellum South. In late 1864, this site became a large open-air prison for thousands of Union troops evacuated from the Anderson, Georgia prison in advance of Sherman's march to the sea. Before Charleston fell in February 1865, several hundred of the prisoners died and were buried in mass graves. In an effort led by African-American churches in April 1865, the dead were reinterred in orderly graves enclosed by a picket fence. Over the gate was written, 'Martyrs of the Racecourse.' On May 1, 1865, a parade in honor of the prisoners of war who died here took place with 10,000 participants, according to contemporary accounts. Nearly 3,000 were school children from the new Freedmen's Bureau schools. The children led the parade, carrying armloads of flowers and singing patriotic songs. They were followed by women's organizations, church leaders, unionists, recently emancipated slaves, and Union troops, including the 54th Massachusetts. The soldiers were later buried in Beaufort and Florence National Cemeteries or in their hometowns. Annual events to honor the dead of both sides of the Civil War eventually became known as Memorial Day. The event in what is now Hampton Park is acknowledged by most historians to be the first Memorial Day in the United States of America. Now, I didn't know about the origins of this holiday, this holy day, sacred day, when I was a kid, dressed up in colors of the flag, riding in my grandpa's Model A Ford in the local parade. Memorial Day was about people past, but it was about us, centered on our losses. And to some degree, that makes sense. Knowledge and recognition of the origins of this holiday is actually fairly recent. In 2001, David W. Blight, who's a scholar and professor from Yale, he published Race and Reunion, the Civil War in American Memory. Research into that book uncovered the long buried facts about this first Decoration Day. That's pretty recent, barely 20 years old. So it's understandable that I didn't know about where Memorial Day came from. However, now that I do, it's my responsibility to pass this piece of information along to my children and even here. When I speak about why this holiday is important to remember, that piece of this holiday is important to remember too. Yes, it's now all about all who have died in service to this country, but it didn't start that way. It started as a way for oppressed and an enslaved community to recognize its sacrifice for the unexperienced, yet anticipated aspirational goal of freedom. This holiday is complicated. I have a complicated history with war and activism, with the military and ethics. Unitarian Universalism also has a complicated history with war and activism, with the military and ethics. And I feel like some days I just embody those complications as a Unitarian Universalist military chaplain. I've heard people, more unfortunately than one or two, state that Unitarian Universalists should not serve in the military. I had a congregant back in New York where I served for a while who he's since died. He was a veteran. He was a Marine who fought in the Korean War. He vehemently opposed any UU be in uniform and believes that any Unitarian Universalist who put on a uniform should be kicked out of Unitarian Universalism. He believed that ours is a peacemaking tradition, which is true, but we're not all pacifists. And we are not a pacifist tradition. So, you know, there's only a handful of UU military chaplains. There's probably about 25 of us total across all branches, active, duty, reserve, and guard. At General Assembly, we're required to be in uniform for a couple of events every year. A few years ago, one of my colleagues, a Navy chaplain, was in uniform going to a worship service, and a UU spit on him at General Assembly, not in the 70s. This was less than 10 years ago at General Assembly. There are conflicting experiences and beliefs around Unitarian Universalism and military service. And I'm not here to dismiss these conflicts. I actually think we should be talking about them. But I'm also here to acknowledge and remember that UUs are in the military. We always have been. We serve, and many of us die in service to this nation. David Pyle, who's a UU minister and an Army Reserve chaplain, currently serving, spent time at Arlington National Cemetery, and he photographed hundreds of headstones. Many he found adorned with chalices. Our Unitarian Universalist and Unitarian Universalist ancestors who have served in the military, and their commitment to our faith is inscribed on their headstones. The chalice serves as a marker and a monument to the sacrifice of UUs in service to this nation. Got some more pictures here I want to show you. So David actually took this picture at Arlington. John Quincy Adams here, a captain in the Army during World War I. Silver Star, Purple Heart. He didn't die in battle, but he served honorably. And there's his chalice. Now, if you know UU history and American history, you should recognize that name. Born in 1924, he is not the same one that is the 6th president of the United States, but very likely named for him, as John Quincy Adams and John Adams were both Unitarians. Now, this is a photograph of John Murray. He is, I don't have a picture of his headstone. He is argued to be the founder of Universalism in the United States. And he was a chaplain, a Universalist chaplain with the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, appointed by General George Washington. That's who he received his appointment as a Universalist chaplain. Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, commander of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment in the Civil War. Now, that may not ring a bell, or it might if you saw the movie Glory. Matthew Broderick played him in the film. He commanded the 1st Black Regiment in the Civil War and died on the battlefield with his men. He's a Unitarian from Massachusetts. Louis A. McGee served as a chaplain in the Army. He was an African-American, an AME, which African Methodist Episcopal preacher at the time, who found Unitarianism and humanism. In 1927, Reverend McGee approached the American the American Unitarian Association, asking to become a Unitarian minister. He was told that if he wanted to become a Unitarian minister, he better bring his own congregation, because he wouldn't be called to a congregation because most of them were white and he was Black. But he stuck with it. So that was in 1927. He stuck with it. He actually went to Meadville Lombard, which is where I serve now as a professor. He went there and got his doctorate of divinity. And in 1947, 20 years later, he became fellowshipped as Unitarian minister. Louis and his wife, Marcella, started a church here in Chicago, where I live, called the Free Religious Fellowship, that gained support of the American Unitarian Association. And later he would minister a large congregation in Los Angeles. He was an Army chaplain. This is the headstone for Lieutenant Colonel Donald Campbell, United States Air Force. This photo was sent to me by a colleague of mine, his wife, Reverend Madeline Campbell. Donald died just a few years ago in 2013. Madeline and Donald's daughter also served in the Air Force. And when she was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel a few years later, she pinned on her father's silver oak leaf clusters. She has since died just about a little over a year ago. Madeline, who's a UU minister, recently began her own service and is a chaplain with the Civil Air Patrol, which is the volunteer auxiliary branch of the Air Force. Captain Laurel Clark, a flight surgeon in the Navy and an astronaut. She died on the Space Shuttle Columbia in 2003. Captain Clark was a member of the Olympia Brown congregation in Racine, Wisconsin. So Unitarian Universalists serve in the military. We always have. I've met UUs, both veterans and currently serving, all over the country. We're always excited to find one another. And it's bittersweet because we don't know how many UUs there are serving. I think some of it's because of our complicated history with our faith in the military that we don't talk about it. So we're isolated from each other and we're isolated from our faith communities. Military service is not incompatible with Unitarian Universalism. Many founders of this nation were Unitarian and Universalist. Many fought in the Revolutionary War. The democratic ideals illustrated in the founding documents of this nation are not far off from our 7 principles. Right? I have to remember that the founding documents of the United States and UU's 7 principles are similar in that they both hold forth ideal visions that we often fall short of. They are a place we want to be, but they're not the place that we are yet. That's so disappointing at times. It can be so disheartening. It is in these times that it's important to remember our ideals. And for those of us in covenant community, we get back into covenant. Now, Memorial Day, Decoration Day, a time to remember. So this book here, this is a great book, I don't know if you can see it here. It was edited by Matt and Gail Tittle, who both served in the Navy. Later, Matt was a intelligence officer, and after he retired from the Navy, he became a UU minister. He is also unfortunately since died. This book is called Bless All Who Serve, Sources of Hope, Courage, and Faith for Military Personnel and Their Families. It's a collection of readings and reflections from a primarily UU perspective. It's just the right size to fit into a uniform pocket. That was intentional. The Church of the Larger Fellowship and the UUA have been working to have funding to be able to give this book free to any military personnel who request them. And that's a great effort to help fund. We've received a case of these at my base. And so they're on the table in any deployment line, right next to Bibles and the other prayer books, available for service members to take with them and keep them connected to their faith while they're far away from home. In here is a really short reading from Forrest Church, who was the senior minister for many years at All Souls Unitarian in New York City. He's a prolific writer and UU public theologian, and he also just died a few years ago. This is what he wrote. This is the reading from this book. Religion is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. Knowing that we are going to die, we question what life means. We're not so much the animal with advanced language or the animal with tools as we are the religious animal. Having discovered relics and flowers in ancient graves, certain anthropologists apply to us the sobriquet Homo religious. We have honored our dead from time immemorial, even as we continue to shift through their ashes in anticipation of our own earthly remains. There's something in remembering. We remember those who have gone before us, but we also then have to recognize that we're on that same path. Christian theologian C.S. Lewis also is quoted in this book, wrote a lot about death. He's most commonly known for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Screw Tape Letters. The play and the film Shadowlands was a biography about Lewis's romance with Joy Gresham and their grappling together with her terminal cancer. Death and dying influenced much of his writing. He even wrote about it in the military context, also from this book. Death, he said, comes to everyone. 100% of us will die, whether by machine gun fire or 40 years later from cancer, he wrote. What is different about military service is that it forces one to actively prepare for death, unquote. It is the one thing we're all guaranteed. But for many of us, we keep it at bay and try to keep it unconscious. Military service raises our impending death out of unconsciousness into a living reality that must be addressed. C.S. Lewis says that remembering and actively preparing for death is actually a blessing. It's a blessing to pay such close attention. Part of that blessing is to remember that we are now living. This dual reality that Forrest Church talks about, that we are alive and we must die. If Forrest Church is right, and religion is what helps us navigate this unavoidable path, as UUs, what does Unitarian Universalism have to help us navigate that? Well, one of the things we don't have is hell. The Universalist side of our theology says there's no hell. So without a threat of hell, what do we have to help us orient and make decisions and determine where our values lead us? While Universalism says we don't have hell, we also don't have the dogma around heaven. The afterlife is undecided. Individually, we have different beliefs and opinions and experiences around an afterlife, but theologically, Unitarian Universalism doesn't have one set of doctrine around it. So again, how to navigate? What we do have is our 7 principles, and soon I pray 8 principles. Those are our guide to some deep places. They can seem simple or trite, but they are deep spiritual and theological principles that can help us navigate the reality that we are alive and we have to die. Since we don't have a literal hell and we're not sure about heaven or an afterlife, a modern UU framing of these is that heaven and hell are here on earth right now for us and for generations to come. The 7 current principles, and most especially this proposed 8th, help guide us in how to engage the world to help bring more heaven and stop the hell that exists right here, right now. Where are we? What are we doing to make it hell? What are we doing to make it heaven? The free and responsible search for truth and meaning helps us navigate what we're doing in our lives so that our lives have meaning. And for some, what our deaths will mean. Our covenanted community means we don't have to do this alone, and that's powerful. The salvific power of Unitarian Universalism, what saves us from not paying attention, are the principles in our covenants. On weekends like this one, Memorial Day, Decoration Day, when it's about remembering, remembering saves us. We need to pay attention and not unconsciously just move on to the next thing and then be surprised when the end comes. We have one another. We have folks here. But I want to lift up that there's also UUs and other free thinkers all over the world in every walk of life. When I meet UUs in the military, so often they've never met another UU in uniform. And I think some of that comes because we've decided that UUs don't talk about our faith. And so we don't recognize how many of us there are, to be here for one another. Remember the UUs who have served and who are in the military today, many feeling isolated. Let's not keep this to ourselves. It's not just our faith. Let's not keep it to ourselves. Pay attention, share about it. Really pay attention, because we're all heading the same destination. Take a cue from those of us who wear a uniform. Actively live your life and actively prepare for death. And this weekend, remember. Amen. So now it's time for a moment of meditation. For this meditation, I'm going to read a poem by poet Archibald MacLeish. It's called The Young Dead Soldiers. The young dead soldiers do not speak. Nevertheless, they are heard in the still houses. Who has not heard them? They have a silence that speaks for them at night, and when the clock counts, they say, "We were young, we have died, remember us." They say, "We have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done." They say we have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know what our lives gave. They say our deaths are not ours, they are yours. They will mean what you make them. They say whether our lives and our deaths were for peace and a new hope or for nothing, we cannot say. It is you who must say this. They say we leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning. We were young, they say, we have died. Remember us. Please join in the spirit of singing Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Please join me in the words for extinguishing our chalice, which appear in your order of service and on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again.
Let us sing together our closing hymn, O Young and Fearless Prophet.
O young and fearless prophet of ancient Galilee, your life is still a summons to serve humanity, to make our thoughts and actions less prone to please the crowd, to stand with humble courage for truth with hearts unbowed. Oh, help us stand unswerving against war's bloody way, where hate and lust and falsehood hold back your holy sway. Forbid false love of country that turns us from your call. Who lives above the nation, the neighborhood of all. Create in us the splendor that dawns when hearts are kind, that knows not race nor station as boundaries of the mind, that learns to value beauty in heart or mind or soul, and longs to see God's children as sacred, perfect whole. Stir up in us a protest against unneeded wealth, for some go starved and
benediction comes from Reverend Barbara Paskin, and this is a Memorial Day prayer. Spirit of life, whom we have called by many names in thanksgiving and anguish, bless the poets and those who mourn. Send peace for the soldiers who did not make the wars, but whose lives were consumed by them. Let strong trees grow above graves far from home. Breathe through the arms of their branches. The earth will swallow your tears while the dead sing no more. Never again, remember me. For the wounded ones and those who received them back, let there be someone ready when the memories come, when the scars pull and the buried metal moves. And forgiveness for those of us who are not there for our ignorance. And in us, veterans in the forest of 1,000 fallen promises, let new leaves of protest grow on our stumps. Give us courage to answer the cry of humanity's pain, and with our bare hands, out of full hearts, with all our intelligence, let us create the peace. Amen and blessed be.
I'll be giving a brief talk this morning on the reasons we celebrate Memorial Day. The nation has experienced a grueling past 4 years, where our country came perilously close to experiencing a constitutional crisis, the likes of which this nation has not seen for a long period of time. We witnessed an attempt at usurping constitutional law and the committing of illegal tactics that very well might have usurped the very freedom our armed forces, men and women, have fought for over the past 100 years. Many of the founding fathers also proclaimed their concern over this possibility as well. George Washington described his view on how the United States could be adversely affected by anarchy and confusion. Quote, "The deepest and most urgent risk to the United States was that political chaos created fertile ground for exploitation by some aspiring demagogue who would not consult the interest of his country so much as his own ambitious views." Mark Twain said, "Patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it." Memorial Day is a time we honor all military men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. The veterans we honor at Memorial Day are someone's son and brother and father and daughter and sister and mother. They answered the call of duty and served their country in most cases, very far from home. Their sacrifice will not be in vain as long as we remember to honor them and live our lives according to the ideals that our country prides itself on. Let's also not forget the family members who sacrificed so much at a loss and death of their military family members. Franklin Delano Roosevelt stated, "Those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them." Memorial Day custom. Most notably on Memorial Day, the flag is lowered at half staff at noon and then raised to the top of the staff at sunset. In 2000, Congress established a moment of remembrance, which asks Americans to pause 1 minute at 3 p.m. in an act of national unity. This time was chosen because 3 p.m. is the time when most Americans are enjoying the freedom of the national holiday. And we all need to remember this democracy is worth fighting for. And our final Memorial Day custom is to play taps in honor of all the veterans who gave their lives so that we now can enjoy the abundance of freedom the 21st century America provides.